Welcome to, it's 7 o'clock, so it's the witching hour, so welcome to the September 7th meeting of the Hamilton Zoning Board of Appeals. Our agenda is as follows. Public hearing for the property at 3 Beach Street. Eric Memo asking approval to amend the 2021 ZBA decision, which approved an extension or alteration of a non-conforming use to construct an addition at the rear of the existing single-family dwelling so that 2 additional stories may be constructed on the addition, and to appeal the Town of Hamilton Building Inspector's decision, which issued a cease and desist order. Then we have continuation of a public hearing for a comprehensive permit for an application submitted by Harborlight Community Partners to construct a 45-unit multifamily housing at 466 Highland Street. And then the continuation of a public hearing for the property owned by Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary, Inc. at 130 Essex Street. Applicant is Harborlight Community Partners, seeking a variance from the lot area requirements in zoning bylaws section 4.1 in order to create 3 lots pursuant to zoning bylaws section 5.3.2.1 and findings of fact under ZBA section 5.2 for a change of use from student housing to multifamily housing under ZB 5.3.1.2 in order to construct 3 additions to the existing multifamily dwellings which have historically been used for student housing. We do have some minutes to approve, and that is it. So the first order of business is the application of Eric Memo for at 3 Beach Street. Before we hear from the applicant, there are some, I'm going to put on the record some materials received from the building inspector, the Conservation Commission, and the Board of Health. This is a memorandum from Richard Maloney, the building inspector, dated August 30th. Dear board members, this memo is to update the board on the situation at the above referenced property. A timeline of events may help. Application to the ZBA, November 12th, 2020. ZBA decision, January 4, 2021. Building permit application, March 15, 2021. Foundation only permit issued April 12, 2021. Full permit released October 12, 2021. Owner came in on July 2022 requesting 3rd floor. Cease and desist issued July 27, 2022. I issued the foundation only permit in April of 2021 because the plans submitted were terrible and the owner wanted to start construction. As you can see, the time delay on getting better plans and releasing the full permit took some time. I erroneously released a full permit for a 2-story addition. In July of 2022, as the structure was being framed, a few of the abutters came in to voice their concerns about the size of the addition. We reviewed the ZBA documents and meeting minutes and realized the error. At this time, a cease and desist order was issued to the owner. Under MGL Chapter 40A, Section 7, there's no protection for up to 6 years for structures built with a faulty building permit. The applicant was advised he could build the 1-story addition as approved by the ZBA. He's chosen to appeal the building inspector's decision, and in lieu of a win on the appeal, is seeking a finding to erect a 2nd and 3rd floor to the structure. Hope this information is helpful. Memo from the Conservation Commission, which I'll try to summarize a bit. Conservation Commission is familiar with the property, having reviewed a proposal permit issued under the state's Wetlands Protection Act on 6/22/20 that expires 6/22/23 and is recorded in the registry. Under the same DEP file number, a permit was issued on the same date under the town's conservation bylaw. That bylaw expired 1 year from its date of issuance, 6/22/21, and is recorded in the registry. No record of this having been extended. Under the state's permit, any incomplete work may continue. Should any incomplete approved work be conducted within the commission's jurisdiction, a new local bylaw permit needs to be issued. When work is complete, it is the applicant's responsibility to request a certificate of compliance and close out the WPA and bylaw permit. The work permitted by the Conservation Commission is only relevant to those areas within 100 feet of a wetland resource area. The most extreme northeast corner of the lot is likely within 100 feet of Tobacco Lake. The plans associated with the approved project included a delineated wetland to the south of the lot, showing the areas within the jurisdiction. This includes most of the yard and some of the structure. Primary activities permitted included the removal of several trees, a 21 by 40 extension, and a soil stockpile. And then finally, a memo from the Board of Health, which I will definitely summarize rather than read into the record. In this case, because apparently our health agent, Greg Bernard, had done some, it wasn't clear, some work for the applicant. This was referred to Erin Kirchner, who was the Essex Board of Health Administrator, and she submitted this memorandum. She may be aware I was asked to review and provide a determination of the proposed building plans for the above-mentioned property as they related to the existing septic system. I noted the following. The existing dwelling is classified as 3 bedrooms per the assessor's records. The septic system currently serving this dwelling was designed for 4 bedrooms or 400 gallons per day, as stated in the construction permit dated 5/25/1973. The applicant is proposing to construct an addition that will include a kitchen renovation, a first-floor office, 2nd bathroom suites, an unlabeled room on the 3rd floor. Under Title V, a room with privacy, electrical service, ventilation, and measuring over 70 square feet is considered a bedroom. She goes through some more detailed discussion of what constitutes a bedroom, and then concludes, "It is my professional opinion that the proposed building plans as submitted would result in an increase in allowable septic system flow by at least 1 bedroom. By my review, the proposed renovation would result in a total of 5 bedrooms, exceeding the septic system capacity by 1 bedroom or 100 gallons per day. A full determination would require review of the layout, either on a plan or conducting an in-person walkthrough." So that's those are matters for the record. We can now hear from the applicant or his representative to tell us what he's proposing. And please go to the speak there.
Good evening, Eric Memo. I'm the applicant proposing the addition on my home. I sent a packet with this paperwork in. Did anyone receive that packet? Just regarding the...
Yep, we did.
Okay. Did you receive the letter that I sent in as well, stating...
Why we should grant your request? Yes,
So
it was part of our pack. Yes.
Okay, because I just want to make sure everyone had a
Yeah.
chance to read that and understand the whole situation of the build.
Right.
So again, I'm proposing to build an addition on my home to the rear of the property. Originally, when I first met with you, it was a single-story addition. After meeting with the architect, as stated, the build changed from a single-story to a two-story because of the roof line of the existing home and the height of the existing home with the ceiling heights. So in the build itself, the final build, it is still a 4-bedroom home. I understand that within parameters of the laws of the Board of Health, that certain rooms could be classified as a 5th bedroom, and that at some time I may need to upgrade the septic system upon sale of the home. But my home and room count doesn't really affect my family use. We've had that 4-bedroom septic system for the last 6 years. It's serviced every year, and we've had no issues with it. My understanding with that. But if I do have to upgrade the septic system in order to build the home, I understand that would, definitely have to happen upon sale of the home. The reason we decided to add the 3rd story is because of the location of the home. It's set back behind Chabaco Lake. We are opposite of the actual waterfront owners. But by adding that 3rd story does give us the view of the lake. So that was the whole proposal of going from a 2-story build to the 3-story build. And that room in itself is just an open room. And again, like you stated, the 1st floor has a kitchen, the office, the bathroom, and the pantry. The 2nd floor has 3 additional bedrooms. 2 of the existing bedrooms in my home are actually being eliminated. One of them turns into a hallway in order to access the 2nd floor, and then the other one turns into a study because you have to remove the closets in order to create the hallway. So I'm eliminating 2 existing bedrooms, keeping 1 in the existing home, and adding 3.
Okay. We'll start. Any questions from my colleagues? Sorry, we are on Zoom, and our associate alternate member, Andy Phillip, is joining us by Zoom. So if you're there, Andy, good evening. Okay.
Hello. No, I don't have any questions at this time. I'm still reading and formulating my thoughts, so pass for now.
Okay. Any questions from other colleagues?
When you got the permit, when did you notice that it was saying 2 stories, not 1?
So when I went to town hall after I went to this Zoom meeting, explained in the letter, I had the handwritten drawings that I presented to this board. The building inspector said these drawings were not sufficient. You need to hire an architect. When I hired an architect and told him what I wanted to build, when he tried to attach that build to the house, that's when we realized we could not do a single-story addition. And we had plans designed for a 2-story addition. We didn't know how I was going to build out the 2nd story. And so have you seen the drawings that were submitted to the building department prior to issuing the permit?
If it was in,
I mean, the drawings with the original filing?
I don't think you guys got this, so let me just do this.
This one.
yeah, we have all that.
So, and there's the original drawings of what was submitted in October.
This?
Nope, that was what was submitted to you. Let me give you a copy of this.
All right, that was at the original permit.
Okay.
I think I have one more. So if you flip through that packet, you're going to see the drawings that I submitted to the building inspector prior to issuing the full building permit.
Well, I think he says in his letter that he erroneously issued the permit. He admits that he...
So that was my question. When we approved the previous build, it was for that 1-story, and you're gonna do the work in the back. You mentioned sheds and stuff like that. Then the building inspector sent his out, obviously with an error When did you notice the error on the building inspector's paperwork?
So there was no end error on the building inspector's paperwork. The error was made is when I turned in the plans for the second-story build, the actual architectural drawings, he never informed me that I had to come back in front of the board. He just reviewed those drawings, because he had the original single-story drawings, he reviewed the second-story drawings done by the architect, and then he issued me a full building permit. So as far as I knew, I was all set to build. So I went ahead and started the build, and it wasn't until a month and a half ago, when I spent the first day putting on the second level, is when I got the cease and desist order, and he goes, "Hey, wait a second, you're only approved for a single story." And I said, "That's impossible, because there's no way I could even build this addition if it was gonna be one story, and that's what the architectural drawing showed you. It had to be at least 2 stories.
It doesn't compute for me, but I don't know what your house looks like, because we don't have drawings of your existing house. I don't know what your
Just pictures.
floor plan is, those pictures and stuff, but I don't know, one-story house and a one-story addition shouldn't be that much of a challenge.
Well, the problem is with the,
Had plans when you first applied for this. And you might be able to come
And the other issue was that
right away.
obviously you understood how the zoning board operates. You come in to get permission, we give you permission for a very specific build. And then obviously the building, when you submitted it, the building inspector may have erroneously done something, but it still was a change from what we originally authorized as the zoning board.
yes, I understand that, and this is,
So I get it, you're kind of in a situation where you've obviously done work, but the building inspector noted his mistake, and there is the, you know, the statute of limitation, as Bill mentioned, with that 6-year window. I mean, I would have followed up with at least saying, can I talk to the zoning board before I continued on? Because again, we went over this and we looked over your case pretty thoroughly in that meeting. So, I mean, someone should have reached out to us before you started changing what we authorized.
I totally agree. This is my second time in my life I've ever dealt with the zoning board. The first time is the first time I've met you. So I didn't know, I've done 2 other building permits with my license, and they were both small projects for my family. So I didn't know I needed to come back in front of the board. And I stated that in the letter I wrote you guys.
Yeah.
I apologize. I wish this meeting happened the following month I submitted the paperwork. So then this wouldn't, but I just was not informed. And once I got the full building permit, everything on my paperwork end told me I was good to build.
Well, normally, you know, obviously, some board has to come first, and often it's the zoning board. But, and we're happy generally to make a decision, and then you go to other boards. But given the letter from the Board of Health, seems to, what the Board of Health says, you know, is going to potentially significantly impact how this thing is built. Because if it has the potential for 5 bedrooms, it's not going to be enough to just say it's going to put in a septic system down the road. What they would require is basically something on file at the Registry of Deeds, a restriction that would restrict you to 3 bedrooms, because that's, or 4 bedrooms, because that's what you currently have a septic system to, that it would support. So, I'm going to suggest, I guess my colleagues can weigh in, is that you work this out with the Board of Health. I mean, are you willing, is first. I mean, you're going to have to end up coming back here, but we're not going to approve a building that the Board of Health tells us could contain 5 bedrooms in spec. So I think you have to, peace with the Board of Health
Well, again,
as a start.
I have no issues if the septic system needs to be upgraded, sir. I don't feel the septic system needs to be upgraded with my current family living in the home, but again, upon resale of the home, that is one requirement, that if the house has been modified in any way where the septic system is not sufficient, then before the home can be sold, the septic system has to be upgraded.
Anybody hearing a?
I think that's the podium microphone.
Oh, am I too close? I'm
Okay, sorry. Yeah.
I apologize.
No problem. So,
Up here, I hear an echo,
yeah,
so I'm not sure.
my point is, it has to be, if you're building it now, it has to have a septic system that supports it now. So I think, and how you achieve that is, there are different ways. As I say, you may put a restriction on it, you may cut back the size of it. In general, in terms of obviously procedurally, you had to appeal the cease and desist order. This is where it's sort of justice and mercy. The justice is, it may not seem just to you, but what the building inspector said in his letter is right. He represents the town, so the town basically doesn't always have to eat its own mistakes. So legally, you don't have an approved plan. That's why you had to come back here. We can, depending on how we're feeling, not feeling, but how the circumstances, we can perhaps provide some relief, but I think the cease and desist order, my view of it is, it certainly stands for now. I don't see any basis to overturn it. Anybody else want to jump in here? I'm suggesting that we continue this and you go talk to
neighbors
the...
here that want to?
Yeah, I guess
say
we should,
anything?
we'll hear, so,
Before I leave the podium from the board,
okay.
unless you want me to come back at the end, after you hear from the neighbors?
Yeah, but, I'd like to, sure, you can respond to them, but, yeah, I guess we might as well get as much done as we can, but I guess speaking just for myself at this point, I'm not prepared to vote on anything tonight because of this Board of Health issue, among others. But, yeah, in the interests of,
But as you stated, and I've talked to other homeowners, we can put a restriction on the home that the home can only be sold as a 4-bedroom home with the current 4-bedroom septic system. That doesn't really pertain to my build itself. I'm here tonight to get the
that's
approval.
something that, as I say, that the Board of Health seem to think that on the face it does.
And I'm happy to.
The rules.
No, and I'm happy to deal with the Board of Health on that issue, sir. I'm not arguing with you
Okay.
on that.
But-
But I'm here for the board here is to decide whether the build I'm proposing meets all the town bylaws to allow me to build the home that I am proposing. And I've researched all the town bylaws, and I can't find one reason to oppose my build. So I'm here seeking this board to look at my build and give me a legitimate reason why I can't build what I have presented to this board.
Well, we do have I will say, this board, under the applicable bylaw and state statute, we do have the power to approve this should we choose. But, that's within our discretion, so.
It is, sir, but you have to understand the situation this town has put me in. I have a build in mid-construction. I have material and everything exposed right now that I've got somewhat to mitigate the water situation. I've got half my house torn apart that you can see in the pictures. This was all set up, like I said, it was not my mistake, sir. It was a mistake
That's
that
been admitted,
happened.
but that's, so.
So I'm
well, I-
asking for a little relief from this board to please look at my plans and please determine if there's something in my plans that is against town bylaws that I can't build this. I understand there's situations I have to deal with the septic system and have to deal with on that end to continue the build, but to delay this with this board for another month is gonna put me close to trying to build this in the middle of winter. And I'm doing this build myself, sir. I'm doing it myself with my father and my wife and children. This is not a construction project that is being built by a company. And this situation has already put me in a 45-day delay when it happened.
Well, speaking, again, just for myself, what I think, I would not vote to approve a third story on this.
Yeah, I was gonna chime in after you spoke. If you had come to us with this original plan at the start, I would not have approved the third story either. I would have stuck with the original plan that you presented because it fit with the current frame of the house. It worked well with how you explained it, even though it was a hand drawing. We understood what we were doing. This is a much larger project than what was originally that the board understood. I mean, you got changed midway, and none of us were aware of the change. Again, not knowing is not an answer. It's just, if you change a plan that the board approves, the board should be notified. And we were not notified you changed our approval.
And I apologize for that, but again, that was not my mistake, sir. And regarding the height of my build and doing the third story, I just want to present you with this document. There are 6 homes or 5 homes currently that this board has approved that are on my street that have all been allowed to build to the height of 35 feet. And one of them is my abutting neighbor that is right next to me, and he is farther setback, closer to the wetlands, and he built with less than 1 foot away from his property line.
Okay.
Speaking of abutters and neighbors, is there any feedback from the community on this build?
Okay, we'll hear from some abutters or their representative, and but please be brief and be civil. So again, why don't you take a seat, Mr. Memo,
Thank you very much.
and if anyone wishes to speak, they'd go to the microphone.
Good evening, Mr. Chair, honorable members. My name is Bill Sheehan. I practice law in Peabody, Massachusetts, and I represent Denise Kelly, who resides, she's the next-door neighbor, and resides at 2 Beach. What I'd like to do is hand out a table of comparison with respect to the proposal of Mr. Memo compared with the other houses that are nearby. In essence, our position is that because this house is grossly disproportionate to the neighborhood, will block sun, will block air, will interfere with privacy, and as I say, is way too big for the neighborhood, that we're going to ask this board to deny the request for finding that this is not substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood. That has to do with the second piece of Mr. Memo's request for relief. His first request for relief involves an appeal from a cease and desist order. That cease and desist order, as the board has already indicated, was absolutely properly issued. And although I appreciate the building inspector sort of falling on his sword, as he did in the August 30, 2022 memo, I want the board to recall, and I know the board does recall, that there was no question what was being asked by Mr. Memo a year and a half ago. He wanted a single-story addition, 1,017 square feet, to be added to his 1,380 square feet of living area, according to the assessor's records, and this board concluded that that was not so disproportionate as to be substantially detrimental to the neighborhood. If this board had before it then what it has before it now, and I've already heard one member suggest this, I suspect that the decision would have been very, very different. And if I may, What I'm handing out here is as I say, is a comparison of the size of the existing house at 3 Beach, the proposed increase by way of a single story, and what is proposed now, which is 2 more stories, to make it 3 stories. I've also attached photographs, photos that will show you the looming presence that is proposed, and this is only, it doesn't really capture, of course, the presence of the proposed house, because all we see is just a little bit of a framework for the 2nd story. Happily, not a whole lot has been done, at least as one looks at the house, by Mr. Memo. Mr. Memo could not have relied on the suggestion being made now that he was permitted to build a 2-story addition. Your minutes are very, very clear as to what was requested by Mr. Memo. It was a single-story addition. Now what he's really trying to do is bootstrap that single-story addition permission into 3 stories. In doing so, he is proposing a house which will have just under 4,000 square feet in a neighborhood where, and I've compared the closest 7 or 8 houses, where the next biggest house is 2,500 feet. He's proposing to almost triple the size of his structure. He is proposing to increase the size of his place so it's 2.5 times to 3 times as large as the average house that's shown on this comparison. And it's 4 times the size, or nearly 4 times the size, of my client's property. When you look at those things, and you, of course, are very familiar with the case law, I don't have to go into it with you, I'm sure, you know that because he's increasing, he's non-conforming as to lot size, non-conforming as to frontage, non-conforming as to side setback. And because he's building up along that side setback that is non-conforming, but he's increasing the mass of the structure and thus constituting an increase in the nonconformity. That triggers the standard that you'll be applying, which is it substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood? And the answer to that question is largely given by the recent case of Bjorkland, which talks about not permitting under Chapter 48, Section 6, by way of a finding, a house which is grossly disproportionate in size and would interfere with light, air, and privacy of the neighbors. And that's, in essence, the argument that we're making. You've asked me to be brief, and I will be. But that's the outline of it. There's plenty of detail here, and I suspect that some of the neighbors are going to supply that detail, and they'll tell you what it's like, or what it would be like to live in the shadow of this house. But because that standard has not been met here, the request for the relief by way of a finding under 48 Section 6 should be denied. By the way, I would point out, I did see among the papers that are in the file, the building permit application and the building permit. The building permit application very clearly says single story. The building permit that was issued was foundation only, and it was foundation only for the reasons that the building inspector outlined in his August 30, 2022 memorandum. The building inspector was trying to help Mr. Memo out. Well, this is what happens sometimes when you try to help people out. And then, for the suggestion being made that the building inspector dropped the ball, the building inspector, when you look at the building permit, all it says is that the foundation permit, which issued in April, was then foundation complete. You'll see a notation, October, I think it was October 12. Foundation complete, and goes on to talk about now you can build your house, build your addition. But build what addition? It couldn't have been a 2-story addition, because there had never been any discussion about a 2-story addition. There had only been a single-story addition. And it's quite unfair to the neighbors for Mr. Memo to come in here and try to get from no addition to a 3-story addition in this piecemeal fashion. And I trust that the board will so conclude and will deny the relief that's been requested. I thank you for your time. Happy to answer any questions if you have any, and perhaps the neighbors might want to speak very briefly on some of the things that I haven't covered.
Can you tell me that section again? 48, section what?
48, Section 6, the finding that he's looking for is that the proposed structure is not substantially more detrimental to the neighborhood, standard that he can't meet here, given the grossly disproportionate size of the building.
Do you have a copy of the building permit application you?
I do.
Because I don't think that was in our packets. I'd just like to have it for the record.
If I can find that for you, Mr. Chair, in short order. The document that I have is dated 4/12/21, build 21 by 6 by 47 addition in rear of house, install roof on front porch.
Okay.
And then the other document that I have is that notation on the building permit. So I don't know if you have that, or if you,
No, we don't have the, you mean the card? that-
yeah, so
No.
here's the permit card. Work to be done, foundation only for addition, 4/20/21. Foundation completed October 12, 2021 with Mr. Maloney's initials, full building permit.
Okay. Well, that's where does it reference that it was erroneously referred to as or is it based on the fact that plans showing a second story were?
Yeah, apparently what Mr. Memo is saying is that because he submitted to the building inspector plans that were inconsistent with the plans that he submitted to this board, that somehow that gives him a leg up
Okay.
to argue that he's permitted to do what he's doing, and it's just the opposite. He should not be
Patrick,
submitting different sets of
Could we
plans to
get
different boards.
these copied, just so, or can I have these copies?
May.
Or oh, thank you. Okay, then, so these are part of the file. Okay, thank you.
Thank
Mr.
you.
Sheehan. If there are abutters who would like to speak briefly and not repetitively, we can, okay. Is there any other comment at this time? Okay, well, wait a second. Then please come to the,
I'm the building inspector, Rich Maloney.
oh, okay.
One thing I'd like to make clear is Greg Bernard, our septic inspector, just to clear the record, was not an employee when he worked for Mr. Emo. So
Okay.
he did the, just so everybody knows, Greg's a pretty outstanding guy. He was in the private practice. He did not work for the town of Hamilton. He worked for Mr. Memo, did some drafting, his site plan actually for the wetlands. And then we thought it would be prudent that now that he's an employee, he's a septic inspector, we thought it'd be prudent not to get Greg involved for that reason. So just to, I don't want anybody to get the wrong impression about Greg.
No, thank you. Very much.
So, yeah, nobody likes making mistakes, and this is, a lot of mistakes on this one. I was not an employee. I was helping out when I issued this permit. I wasn't around when he went to the Zoning Board of Appeals. And if the Zoning Board of Appeals is familiar, I pretty much sit down with all applicants to the zoning board now, and I make recommendations before they submit to you. And I will tell you, the first thing I would have said, I tell everybody, is you want elevations of the side that needs the relief. And in this case, the zoning application, the plans do not show an elevation from the side that is getting the zoning relief. And then the zoning decision doesn't say anything. It just refers to the plans, which really aren't that good. So if you look at the zoning decision, it just says addition. You know, when you delve into it, it does show it does show it shows the one-story addition very vaguely from the rear elevation. So unless you were here, unless you read the meeting minutes, which generally I don't do, you know, I think we all could have done a better job. That's my opinion. If I was here, it would have been more clear to me, but I was just helping out back in April. I didn't become an employee till July 1st. So I apologize for any mistake, but, you know, once it was brought to my attention, that's when I issued the cease and desist. So that's really the story. Any questions?
No, thank you.
All right.
Mr. Chairman, can I just make one comment, just to
Sure.
follow up on what Mr. Maloney said? I'm looking at the minutes of January 6, 2021. And the applicant is seeking relief for zoning bylaw, dimension 4.0, dimensional density regulations, request approval to construct a 21 feet 6 inches by 47-foot addition in the rear of the existing dwelling. Zoning board members received Mr. Memo's new plans from the building department. Eric Memo explained to the board that the proposed addition would be 1 story, would match the existing footprint. So there really wasn't any question about the single story.
Okay. Mr. Memo, you had...
To speak to the attorney's comments regarding the homes he gave you on the list, I'm not sure what homes he included, but he didn't include the homes that I showed you on Beach Street that are well in excess of 3,000 square feet to 4,000 square feet. And those are all on Beach Street. Regarding what he's making comments regarding the home and the addition affecting the sunlight, wind, and view of the abutters that are opposing this build, the 3 abutters that are opposing this build are all lakefront property owners that are at the front of my home across the street. The sunrise is on the east, which comes up in front of their home that is facing the lake, and then comes over the lake itself, comes over their homes, comes over my home and then my addition, and then falls behind the 100-foot trees behind me before it casts shadow towards them. So my addition doesn't actually cast any shadow of sunlight towards their home and affect them in any way. And behind my home itself, there's 200+ acres of wetlands, so there's no one behind my home that my build does affect. So I just wanted to make that very clear. I'm not trying, this, like I said, this is nothing I would try to do outside the system here. It was just one error after another. And I'm just trying to get this fixed tonight, because like I said, I'm approaching winter. I've already been delayed 45 days, and I just want to get this thing watertight before winter.
Okay, thank you. Any other questions or comments from my colleagues? I'm going to return to, I think this has, this is a case where given the Board of Health issue that's putting the cart, coming to us is putting the cart before the horse, I'm not prepared to vote on this tonight. I would propose that we continue it to next month, and if I understand that Mr. Memo feels he's between a rock and a hard place. If he, we can certainly take a vote if he insists upon it, but I think you can. My vote would be no. The board is not, so I'm going to suggest that we continue it to our October meeting. Anyone have any questions, comments about that, or just before?
Make sure we get a set of drawings of the whole project, the whole house,
Yeah.
existing and new. We have new, but we don't even know, the drawings were, for the house existing is not even to scale, so.
I'm not agreeing with anything over the original plan.
Okay, so you would not
No.
vote for a second story? Or?
No, I approved the original plan based off of what he told us the first time, because it seemed reasonable. He, again, his drawings were not great, but his explanation of what he was doing was. This is now a situation where what he's doing is not explained.
Okay, point taken. I was going to suggest, and I mean, the board can decide that if we did continue it, that, I mean, I have this, Mr. Memo is between a rock and a hard place, but he may have put himself there. And the board is, and ma'am, I'd appreciate it if you would not continuously shake your head one way or the other there in the second row. It's a little distracting. Thank you. If we did continue this, the board's not in the, we're not in the habit of playing let's make a deal, and I'm not saying we should be doing that, but there's obviously a dispute between Mr. Memo and the abutters. It would make some sense if there is a continuance that he and the abutters perhaps see if they could come to an accommodation of something that they would accept. That's just putting that out there.
Not opposed to that.
I'm sorry?
I am not opposed to that.
Okay. So, anyone else want to weigh in here? And we continue this to the, and I think in the meantime, you'd have to take the matter up with the Board of Health. Last shot, Mr. Memo.
Not a problem. David, you said you had questions or something wasn't explained regarding my build, so I just wanted to answer all your questions, sir.
Well, the issue I have, Mr. Memo, is when you first came in, obviously, you had a very straightforward plan. You explained what you wanted to do, you explained why you wanted to do it. Now, as the building inspector has explained, he fell on his sword. But just because there's an error doesn't mean that we can just be like, oh, this isn't the same thing. As someone who came to the board and you saw our process, if there was a change, notifying us should have been your first thought. Then we could have prevented where we are now. And I get it, you're in a position where you've sunk money, time, and resources. And right now, that's what's on your mind. But if we set precedents where if people do this regularly, it will get out of control. Being cordial, as Bruce said, is I'm telling you right now, looking at the layout, the positioning, the pictures, yes, you provided houses that are a little bit larger, but their positioning to other properties is different. I would not approve a 3-story structure, I can tell you that right now. Like, I look at it, there's no way I'm approving you a 3-story. So I want you to just understand that at this moment. But if you can come to some sort of consolidation with your neighbors, so you're not losing out, and as Bill said, work with the septic system and try and figure that out, I will be amenable to working with you on that. But this is a situation where you gave us a plan, we gave you the okay, and that's not what is here. And I can't move past that.
Okay, so with that information, and again, I am trying to rectify a situation that,
You know what, I think everybody, it was weirdly weird stated, so I had it says, I mean, it's now, I think everybody's been. No, we don't have that either.
I can't. So going back to what I was saying, if you have the drawing packet I gave you, the plans I submitted to the building inspector on October, the second plans before he issued me the building permit showed a 2-story addition. Okay, again, that was determined when I hired the architect and figured out how to put an addition on the home. So I'm asking the board now, if you can meet me halfway, I will eliminate the 3rd story, and I will just do the 2-story addition I will have the architect just I will omit the third story from the build, omit the staircase going up to this third story from the build, and I will do the two-story addition. That allows me to finish my build, get it watertight before winter time. And then it puts me at a height of not even, it's actually matching the existing height of my home. Because the ridge line of my home is 25 feet. That would put the new ridge line of my home 25 feet. And I think that's a good halfway point, and I would ask the board to take a few minutes to really consider it, and then I'd really like to have a vote on this, because I think it's a win-win for everybody, and I really would appreciate you really to think about this.
Any input from my colleagues? It's not going to happen tonight for me. I'd
Yeah, I'm not
consider
ready.
it, so.
I need to look at all this. I gotta go visit these houses and see. They're just pictures of houses. I don't know where they are, how they sit on their land, what the comparisons are, so I need to look at that. I
Okay.
can't just allow it.
Okay, then I suggest we continue this matter to our October 5th meeting.
Seconded.
I'm moving.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. All those, any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you all for your attendance.
Thank you very much.
Thanks. Okay, we'll take a couple of minutes break before we get going. That woman, she was driving me nuts. She was like going like this.
Yeah, well, if the roof is in line and the wall
You, since the August meeting, did you watch the tape of the August meeting?
Yes, I liaisoned with Patrick. He sent me the links. I watched the entire meeting on August 30th, informed Bill that I was watching it, then informed him when I finished watching it and sent that to all the ZBAs, along with my thoughts based off the meeting.
Okay, and this was the first meeting you've missed during this hearing?
Yes, that was the first one I missed during this process.
Okay, so you, having watched it,
David, were you able to prepare the Mullen rule form?
Pardon me?
There's a form, it's called the Mullen rule form, that allows you to miss one of the hearings, and then you fill it out. It's basically an attestation that you've done the either evaluated, read the minutes, or watched the film.
Okay, so we will do that immediately.
All right.
but you attest that you
Yes,
watched the video, and this was the first meeting
The
that,
very long video.
okay. Very good. So David, Parent Chief, is basically invoking his right to continue to be part of the hearing under the Mullen Rule. Okay, tonight we are going to discuss septic and water issues for the proposed project. So if the applicant would like to kick it off.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chairman and members of the board. I have Charlie Ware from Hancock Associates, who prepared our materials and is going to be here to present on that and respond to questions, interact with the peer reviewer as you need. Also, Ben Timon, our attorney, on some of the questions around the restrictions of the land following Charlie.
Okay.
Good evening. I'm Charlie Ware with Hancock Associates. Patrick, we had exchanged some emails earlier in the day. I didn't know if we could get a plan up on the screen.
Did you print?
I didn't. I thought it was. It's
Was
just
it part of an email, Charlie?
It is part of the plans that we submitted initially. It's the site plan that was part of the initial submission. I can put a plan up on a board if need be, but I thought from the emails today that we were set. I didn't. Otherwise, I would have brought a stick. I didn't understand that. Apologies.
Yeah, that would have been helpful. I
Yeah.
get too many emails to be able to dig it up. I'll try, though.
I might be able to send you an email of it right now.
Patrick, while you're looking, do you have? Thanks.
I know.
The
Okay.
process.
Charlie, if you have the stick, that would be helpful. I'm not sure the email is connected to that laptop.
Okay, no, I don't have it on a stick.
All right.
I can put a board up.
Charlie?
Yep.
Miranda Smasco speaking. I'm in the audience, and if you want to email it to me, I could share on my screen,
Okay.
if the board is okay with that.
Sounds like a plan.
If it works, it works.
maybe while you're doing that, we could, this is part of the presentation is, it's been raised an issue about the restriction. Maybe we could talk about that while.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, just to set the stage a little, the attorney for the abutters submitted a memorandum that covered a number of issues, one of which was the possible application of a conservation restriction on what would be abutting property. That's the conservation restriction is held by Essex County Greenbelt and arguably could prevent the septic use that's proposed. So,
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ben Timon for Harbor Light. I am here tonight to speak to the conservation restriction and to hopefully demonstrate to the board that, contrary to what my friend Attorney Hill has put in his letter, that the restriction actually explicitly allows the septic field that's been proposed. And then I'll have as a handout, and maybe I'll just hand it out now, a letter of June 15th, 2021 from Essex County Greenbelt giving permission to use, to put in the septic field, notwithstanding the conservation restriction. So if I may, I'll just distribute that.
thank you. Thanks. If you'd give a copy to Patrick, please.
Thank you.
Okay, maybe just give us a section to, a minute to.
Yes.
Yeah.
If he has too much trouble, he could potentially go into mine. It's all on camera, so it's like, it's not really appropriate.
Okay, thanks.
Thank you. So just to be clear, this I think is the first time that anyone within the board or the planning department is seeing this letter. As you can see, it was issued in June of 2021. We did not, to my knowledge, make it part of our application package because we didn't regard the conservation restriction as being any kind of an obstacle to what we're proposing because of this letter. So we're obviously raising it now based on Attorney Hill's letter of Monday, raising that as an issue. So I just wanted to make that clear in terms of the origin and history of the letter. I think it might be useful to turn to the restriction itself, which Attorney Hill attached as Exhibit 1, or A rather, to his letter. And if you look at the first page of the restriction, which, as you can see, was recorded in 1993, book 12215, page 189. And so that is a conservation restriction in which the grantor, as you can see in the second paragraph where it identifies grantor and grantee, the grantor is, I believe, and I apologize to her if this is the case, the late Ruth Ellen Patton Totten, who is an ancestor of Mrs. B. Britton. So the Brittons are the successors in interest to this land and the conservation restriction that ran with it, or the devisees, whatever the case may have been. And obviously the grantee is Essex County Greenbelt. Now, if you go to the next page, page 2, Attorney Hill in his letter identified some of the prohibited activities, which are sort of general descriptions of activities that would be prohibited. And I don't really think it's necessary to to go through the particular ones that Attorney Hill identified, although I'm happy to in terms of question and answer. The reason for that is because on page 3 is really the relevant portion of the conservation restriction in terms of the reserved rights. So as you'll see there, it talks about the rights that are being reserved by the grantor, which again is the predecessor in interest to the current owners, the Britons. And under 2C, which is on page 4, it specifically and explicitly addresses the issue of a septic system. Quote, the installation, maintenance, replacement, and use of underground utilities for the transmission of water, sewage, gas, telephone, electricity, other such utilities, provided that the area served by such utilities shall be limited to adjoining land owned by the grantors, and provided further that the surface of this restriction area shall be, so far as practicable, restored to the same condition that it was in prior to the disturbance thereof. So there is a specific utility reservation, and which obviously covers by its plain language sewage. And so then that sort of gives the context for the Greenbelt letter, in which they cite to the same provision within the conservation restriction, paragraph 2C, and explain that so long as the septic system that would go on to the restricted land is servicing an adjoining unrestricted parcel, that's acceptable to Greenbelt in their interpretation of this language. And indeed, the conveyance that will occur from the Britons to Harbor Light includes both the unrestricted parcel, which is where the project will be built, and a portion of the restricted parcel where the leaching field will go. So when in the letter to the Britons, Greenbelt says that this is allowable under Section 2C of the above referenced conservation restriction, as long as the land where the septic is located and the land it serves are under common ownership, yours or a future owner. And that future owner will be Harbor Light, and they will own both common parcels. So I think for those reasons, it's a fairly straightforward analysis that the conservation restriction allows what's been proposed, and the grantee of that restriction, Greenbelt, has affirmed that in this letter of June 2021.
Okay. Is the conveyance of the, we'll call it the unrestricted part, where the septic system is going to go, is this going to be a fee simple conveyance, or, I mean, I guess, will it satisfy the in common ownership?
Yes, it will. That's going to be part of the acquisition. That was, in fact, changed in order to conform to what Greenbelt was requiring in this letter.
Okay. I know there's counsel, thank you for the moment. I know there's counsel for the butters here who submitted the letter. Is there anything you'd like to put on the record at this point?
Sure. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the board. My name is Dan Hill. I represent the neighbors at the Canterbrook Farm residential development next door. I did raise this issue in my letter of Monday. I actually, in my last sentence, I suggested that the applicant provide evidence that Greenbelt has consented to this, and until tonight, I had no idea that had happened. So I'll take a look at that letter. I do still find it a little bit strange, though, that the language of the restriction speaks to transmission of sewerage, gas, et cetera. I don't really consider a leaching field to be a transmission of sewage. And I think the intent was a pipe, not discharge of 9,900 gallons per day of raw sewage into the ground. And
Keep it vague.
Sorry?
Keep it vague.
So, anyway, I think that deserves a little bit of follow-up, but that's really all I have to say tonight.
Okay, thank you. We did ask our special counsel to weigh on this. Now, this was pretty late in the day, and if you won't have to go stand in the corner if you haven't come to a conclusion, but
I'll just weigh in briefly. Good evening, Mr. Chair. I'm George Pucci from KP Law, and I'm representing the board on the 40B application and hearings. Just a couple of things that I'll note, and yes, I only just was alerted to the issue this afternoon, so I haven't had a chance to review it. I'm preliminarily hearing from Attorney Timon. It sounds reasonable what they're saying about that they would have the right to do this per that, not because of the letter from the grantee, but on the reasoning stated in the letter. I'd need to look at the restriction myself. I would just note an additional issue, really from the board's perspective, and I just wanted to note this for you as a matter of caution. You have a lot of power within your jurisdiction in terms of acting on behalf of local boards, waiving local regulations that would otherwise apply to this project, waiving certain zoning regulations. You're not, though, an arbiter or a court or an administrative body to delve into property rights. So, you have an eligible applicant before you. What I would suggest, your time is better spent on the substantive issues in terms of, the technical issues involved in the septic system and, local rules and regulations that will, that you would be being asked to waive or to condition this project based on the technical issues involved. You could always put in your permit in the event of an approval with conditions, a reservation on the issue. If it ends up that it's somewhat unclear still, or Attorney Hill looks at this further and he does raise the issue about whether this is permitted under the conservation restriction, you could put a reservation into your permit, but it really is beyond your jurisdiction to resolve that property issue on behalf of either the applicant or the abutter. So I just wanted to note that issue, and hopefully that point is well taken. I know you're getting more and more sophisticated in this 40B process, so hopefully that's helpful. I just wanted, while I'm standing here, as you know, Bill, I try to speak when spoken to. I just wanted to note a caution to the board. That's great that David waved in for tonight. I just wanted to specify, though, to you, you have a 3-member voting board on this application. You don't need a supermajority like you normally would for other matters before you. Just need a regular, in the event you want to grant a permit in this case, you just need a regular majority vote. So it would be a 2-to-1 vote. But you want to make sure that all your voting members stay eligible, because you've identified them at the beginning of the project. And under the Mullen rule, even if you go ahead and review the tape and waive in, you can only miss the one session. So if anybody misses more than one, then you have a 2-member board for the purpose of the application. You just want to be cautious that everybody is just aware of that as you go through this process.
Thank you. Stay healthy. Okay, are we ready to go back to the water and sewer?
Is it Miranda, if you
Great, thank you.
share your...
Is that visible?
Yes. I assume the board has seen this plan before. Just to reiterate, it's located at the southeasterly corner of what is Brickends Farm. Brickends, I think, is about 85 acres. The proposal is to subdivide this parcel away from those 85 acres. This is approximately 5 acres. I believe it's exactly 4.89 acres. We are proposing, as you've said before, we're proposing a single building with 45 units in it, a total of 90 bedrooms. In front of that is the parking lot, and there's also a fire lane on either side. This is a pervious fire lane around the back. Thanks, Miranda. I have a laser pointer as well, but yours is,
Okay, good.
but yours is helpful because people at home can't see it, so, thank you. To clear up an issue that Attorney Hill has brought up, the site is, the impervious surface on the site is 60,525 square feet. I think the confusion was over it was 28% of the 4.89 came out to the number that you had arrived at, Mr. Hill. Sorry, I probably shouldn't be directed to you. But, so I think that's where that number came from. The building itself has a footprint of 23,050 square feet. And then the impervious surfaces on the site are 37,475, which is 28% of the 4.89 acre site. As I mentioned, there's 90 bedrooms total in here. Title V requires 110 gallons per day per bedroom. We are proposing a leaching field out in this area, and also to be there's a reserve area. We've done testing in this area. We've done some preliminary. We've actually done a mixture of preliminary and official testing. And out in this area, we're getting sandy soils. We actually have official testing scheduled for this Thursday to confirm that these systems are based upon sandy soils, which we've found on that site. I just did want to say that I did have the opportunity to review the GM2 peer review. I thought it was excellent. I appreciate the time on that. I think you did the best you could with the fact that we haven't designed the septic system yet, and some of the things you pointed out, I think we're spot on. We do need to, show separation between some of the fields. We need to show that some of the tanks need to be larger. Pictorially, they're shown as smaller tanks, so those need to be corrected. And those are things that we're going to, in the coming weeks, we're going to design this and get it in front of the Board of Health. One of the things that is brought up and is an important issue on this septic system is that we do not meet, the 4.89 acres is not adequate to support. You're limited on this property because we're in the drinking water supply district. We're into a zone 2, as well as the groundwater protection overlay district. We're limited to 110 gallons per day. There are provisions within Title V that allow for that to happen. It's called I think we can see if I can get this right. It's an aggregate plan. And so we have another 19 acres on the site, which we're setting aside to make up for the extra, the 9,900 gallons a day that we have. Under this, under the 4 acres, we wouldn't get anywhere close to that 9,900 gallons a day. But with the aggregate plan and setting aside that additional 19 acres, that gets us to the area that we need for the 9,900 acres. We are, the area is just off to the side here, and we can make adjustments to this in order to make it adjacent, directly adjacent. And from a perspective of groundwater flows, we are down gradient. Groundwater in this area does flow over into this area, and then it flows to the south from there. So we are adjacent and down gradient from that area. One thing I did want to point out too, the 9,900 gallons per day, the flows, those are design flows, and that is a Title V flow. Actual flows will probably be about half that, but this will likely see about 5,000 gallons a day of use. However, under Title V, the design flow is 9,900 gallons a day. I think I want to jump over to that's the septic system. I want to jump over very quickly as far as drinking water goes, there's a water line that runs along this property line and then turns and runs up Asbury Street. It runs over the property of the village at Canterbrook. Our intention is to connect to that water line within the Asbury Street right-of-way and bring that water up and into our building. I actually was the engineer on the village at Canterbrook project, and if I recall, the fire flows. We actually completed a loop when we did that, and and the fire flows were adequate. So I believe that that's the case for this project as well. As far as drainage goes, we have proposed, we're collecting the stormwater from both the rooftop and all of the parking lot, and we're directing it to two. We have a surface infiltration system right in this area, and we also have in the back, we have a subsurface infiltration system in this location. And we have submitted a stormwater report, which has been peer-reviewed. I'm sorry, I forget your name, but
Eric Carlson,
Eric,
Steve Sawyer.
and Steve. Steve, good to see you. I'll let them speak for themselves, but I think the peer review did raise some issues that need to be addressed, but I think they were pretty straight ahead things that we can address within the design of both the septic and the drainage facilities. I did want to talk a little bit about the groundwater protection overlay district. That section states that if you're over 15% impervious surfaces, that you need a special permit in order to allow for that being over the 15%. The 15% is not a hard cap. The 15%, if you go over the 15%, you're required to put in an infiltration system which recharges water to the ground. In other words, collecting the storm water and getting that to the ground. It also requires that we not contaminate the groundwater when we do that. The system that's been designed, we have, as I mentioned, we are proposing 2 infiltration systems on the site. Those infiltration systems are designed in accordance with the Mass DEP stormwater management regulations. The Mass DEP stormwater management regulations have specific provisions to how to design for projects that are in a Zone 2. We meet the requirements of that. So I would this is not just a waiver of a requirement, even though it's listed as a waiver. What we're really doing is asking this board to act on behalf of the planning board, who would normally grant this special permit. So my point being is I believe we meet the requirements of the special permit on the GPOD. And I think that's probably it for me right now.
Okay. Any questions at this point from members or
Do we need to
from my colleagues?
Do we need to be concerned about if the planning board should be approving this over us?
No.
Okay.
No, I mean, just we sit in place of the planning board and the conservation commission and all those, many of those other boards.
The way he worded it just made me go,
It is, yes,
Yeah,
it's
just maybe-
confusing,
yeah.
yes.
Although
agree.
a permit under the GPOD is a ZBA permit
Oh, it is.
anyway.
Oh, so I misspoke then.
No, that's, I can see George has something to say here.
I don't. I think you described it well. I mean,
Okay.
the thing to get distinguished, and you just corrected, it's not planning board, it would be ZBA anyway. What you want to do is waive the requirement for the special permit, because that would fall within your comprehensive permit, but focus on the substantive performance standards that would otherwise be required for that special permit. So you want to have, that's the type of analysis you want to do in this process.
Okay.
When you said it was explained well, you referring to me? Or are you referring to
The
chair?
correction from the chair
Oh,
was,
okay.
but you're doing a very good
I
job.
was going
no.
to say, for an engineer, I was looking for looking for the attorney to give me a compliment.
No, it's very clear up until that part.
Okay, very good.
Okay. Questions at this point other questions from my colleagues? Okay, thanks. Perhaps we'll hear from our peer reviewers. Anything you want to add or point out?
Good evening. I'm Stephen Sawyer. I'm with GM2. We performed the peer review for the keyed in on the stormwater. So starting with stormwater, the design overall, we're in agreement. It's a good approach. With the infiltration, they're going well beyond the requirements of groundwater recharge and water quality volumes on the property. There was a couple items that we would ask that the applicant provide is soil testing within the area of the rear underground infiltration system. There was testing nearby, but as part of the DEP regulations, they require testing within the footprint of the system. So it sounds as if they're out there doing additional, or they're going to be doing the formal testing for the septic, which at that time I'm sure they can perform the test pits at that location. Also, given the extent of the infiltration, is that a mounding, typically with extensive infiltration, mounding analyses are asked for. So we'd recommend that they provide a mounding analysis for that. And even though with the preliminary plans, we just reviewed invert elevations, rim elevations, and it looks as if everything would function without any ponding on the property. All the rims are above the overflow. So the drainage system overall it is appropriate for the scale and size of the development. As far as the septic, as we noted in our comments, typically, or DEP requires, Title V requires a 10-foot separation between reserve and primary areas, which was not shown. Also, the maximum size for each field can handle 5,000 gallons per day. And at 99, they'd have to split the primary into 2 fields and also the secondary into 2 fields. And by adding those 10-foot separations, the fields may grow a bit. That I recommend before finalizing that restricted land area that they have the final septic design done, the field size. I also noted that most of the test pits indicated sandy soils. There was a test pit, I think within 50 or 60 feet, that was a sandy loam, and where these fields are predicated on the highest loading rate of a sand of 0.74 gallons per day per square foot. If for any reason they had a percolation rate slower than 5 minutes per inch, these fields would end up growing, depending on the rate. I did note that some of the percolation rates on site ranged up to, I think there was 50 minutes, around in the neighborhood of 50 minutes an inch. So that would cause the field to grow significantly. So I think that's.
I take it that's a bad thing?
That would be a bad, yeah, that would be a bad thing. Yeah. And then additionally, we did look at the aggregate. There was a plan provided of the aggregate land area. It appears that it was not adjacent, and one thing about the DEP guidance, I guess it's up to if directed by the local board or the department, the DEP, the applicant would need to provide a mass balance analysis, providing that at the down gradient end of their aggregate area, that the land credit area, that their concentration would be below 10 milligrams per liter of nitrogen. and there is, it does state that this credit land needs to be adjacent and down gradient. Now, does the entire parcel need to be down gradient? That would, that's one thing. I think there needs to be a clearer plan provided of that aggregate area, the credit land, to show how it interacts with the plume or the down gradient area of the soil absorption system. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, if you, and I have a question for you when you.
Just two real quick points. One is, and he correctly pointed out about the slow percolation rate. The reason that happened was testing was done actually about 2 years. Actually, it was before the pandemic, so it was probably more than 3 years ago. It was done in the springtime, and the soil was very, very wet. I think that was an outlier. It was being caused because we were testing right at the groundwater, so it stalled. Where we're testing now is down gradient of there, where the soils are, the groundwater is much deeper, and I'm not foreseeing that we're going to have the same problem again, Steve. And then secondly, thank you for pointing that out about the whether or not we need to do the mass balance analysis is up to the Board of Health. It's within the Title V regulations, and that's something that we'll work out with the Board of Health as we move forward.
So just in terms of timing, you're working on a septic system?
We'll have the septic system designed and submitted to the Board of Health before the end of the month.
Okay. So there'll be a completed, presumptively approved septic system before this board votes. Is that?
That would be the intention. Yes.
Okay. Mr. Hill, is there anything you would like to say? Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, Dan Hill for the neighbors, and I appreciate the opportunity to provide some comments tonight. Also attending the meeting by Zoom is our hydrologist, Scott Horsley. Scott actually lives in Sandwich. He would have loved to be here in person tonight, but he couldn't make it this evening. But Scott is on the Zoom, and after I provide my comments, Mr. Chair, if I could indulge the board to have Mr. Horsley summarize briefly his comments. Hopefully you've seen his letter. We submitted that, I believe, yesterday. So I just want to state, first of all, I just kind of want to address something that's fresh in my mind because of the statement that was just made. I understand this test pit's being dug this week to look at the soil conditions and the groundwater, and the board should know that one of the main purposes of test pits in a leaching field is to determine the seasonal high groundwater, so that you have adequate separation between the leaching field and the groundwater. This is really the worst time to be looking for seasonal high groundwater. We're in a drought, a really bad drought, something we haven't experienced in a long time, notwithstanding the rain yesterday.
No, we have a lot of power, but we don't have that much power.
So I would submit that whatever, and the engineer just told us that the soils are sandy in the leaching field, and something I've learned as a lawyer who's been doing this for a while, picking things up from engineers, is that it's really hard to discern seasonal high groundwater modeling in sandy soils. It's much easier to find modeling in other types of soils. So I think it's going to be really difficult to establish a seasonal high groundwater level by looking at physical evidence. Of course, we can extrapolate using USGS wells, but I just want to make that point before I forget it. The bigger issues with this project is really the Zone 2 in the Groundwater Protection Overlay District. And I appreciate the comment that was made that don't worry, this project complies with the standard, but respectfully, it really needs to be proven. The applicant needs to prove to you through evidence, scientific evidence, that there is no degradation. So the standard in your bylaw is that if you're going to exceed 15% impervious, you have to prove that you're not going to degrade the water quality. And the way that's normally done is through something like a mass balance analysis or a pollutant transport model that shows where this nitrogen and phosphorus is going. You're in a zone 2. I can tell you this was a very big issue when my clients' properties were developed next door at Canterbrook. I mean, that was originally proposed to be, I think, over 40 units, and it was brought down to 23. And that's 23 units over, I think, 11 acres. So or 16 acres. So the density of Canterbrook is much smaller than the density proposed here, which is 45 units on 4.89 acres. This is a very important issue for the town of Hamilton and for my clients. The Zone 2, just by the way, is a watershed protection area that's meant to protect the wells that are off of Pine Tree Road in Hamilton. And it's that well field that this Zone 2 protects. That well field draws groundwater from within the Zone 2. We would submit that more proof has to be provided to this board that the groundwater in the district is not going to be degraded, and the applicant should provide a scientific analysis through the mass balance analysis or other types of modeling.
Well, wouldn't the Board of Health require that?
Well, not necessarily. As you heard tonight, it's discretionary for the Board of Health under the nitrogen loading guidelines that DEP has issued. I mean, we would obviously suggest that happen, but I think that this board has jurisdiction because of the Groundwater Protection Overlay District. You certainly can require that type of analysis to comfort yourselves that you can grant this waiver if that's the direction you're leaning towards.
Okay, okay, move on.
I'll move on. So the other issue I want to address is this issue of the credit land. And so one of the unique things about Title V is that if you're in a Zone 2, you can't have a disposal of more than 440 gallons per day per acre. So this project far exceeds that. We're at roughly, I think, 1,800 gallons per day per acre. If you just look at the site of 4.89 acres. And by the way, there's a strange anomaly with Title V. They consider an acre to be 40,000 square feet, not the 43,000 that we're all used to. So this project actually has 5.45 acres under Title V, but it still comes out to 1,816 gallons per day per acre, which is more than 400% the maximum flow in Zone 2s under Title V. So the way that applicant is proposing to get around this is by using what's called credit land, non-facility credit land. And that is allowable under Title V. So you can take land that's adjacent to your site and put a restriction on it and say, this land will never be developed. It can't ever have septic systems. And that is legal if the Board of Health approves it. But in order to do that, there's a lot of conditions to that, and I don't think this project meets those conditions, and that's why I raised these issues.
I just have a question. I'm not trying to be argumentative here, but I kind of want to cut to the chase a little bit. Is Canterbrook in Zone 2?
It is.
And it has, I assume it's got more than this 440. So how did they meet it? Well, I hear what you're saying, but obviously that's a similar property in a sense that meets this standard. So I think you're right. We need some data, but data works both ways. So
yeah, except the Canterbrook property is not in front of you. It's
no, but I think there's some speculation here. So okay, move on. I'm just raising it. I'm trying to.
So, I mean, I can get the answer to you next time. I don't know off the top of my head how that complied. Okay. But with respect to this project, I mean, what they proposed in their application, they did file I think they called it a facility aggregation plan, and it's very blurry. The resolution is not good. I've asked multiple times for a clear copy of that plan. I think the board should demand that a clear copy of the facility aggregation plan be provided so you can understand how they're going to meet the Title V regulations. The conditions, I'll just briefly mention, because I don't think the project complies. The credit land has to be adjacent to the project site. Their current plan does not show it being adjacent. The credit land can't be wet, and yet their credit land on their plan consumes almost all of the wetland that's on the remaining farmland. The dry part of the farm is not being proposed for credit land, presumably because the farmer doesn't want to give it up. Because if you have that as credit land, the farm can't continue. You can't use, agricultural uses are not allowed on credit land under Title V if they're used in a way that would contribute to nitrogen going into the ground. So those are two issues where I don't think this plan complies. And then with respect to the downgrading issue, that may be the case, but that, again, is something the applicant needs to demonstrate to us that, in fact, this is down gradient from the leaching fields. It could be, but they should be providing groundwater flow data. It's not that difficult to produce that kind of model to give us the groundwater contour map that shows where this site is vis-a-vis the leaching fields. So those are the issues that we've raised that I think we need more information and more proof from the applicant to comply with the Title V requirements. But even though Title V is a state law, it's not within your jurisdiction, all of these issues are directly relevant to the Groundwater Protection Overlay District standards, because it really all comes down to we're protecting the groundwater because we're in a Zone 2 for the town's public wells. So that's really all I had to say tonight. I mean, just in summary, we're recommending that the applicant provide a more robust scientific justification for why the board should allow the waiver that it's seeking to allow 28% of impervious surface, but also to demonstrate that its septic system with 9,900 gallons per day is not going to degrade the water quality in the Zone 2. There should be a groundwater mounting analysis. I'll let Scott speak to that point because he's really an expert on those issues. And there should be some additional modeling to show where these pollutants are going to end up. So we know there's going to be a lot of treated wastewater being discharged on this project site. What we don't know is where that ends up. Does it end up eventually in the public wells? And if so, is that a problem? And I did hear tonight the clarification on the impervious surface that I raised last month. Thank you for clarifying that. And that's all I have tonight.
Okay, thank you. And you said you have someone on Zoom?
Yeah, Scott, if Scott's still on Zoom, if he could unmute himself and introduce himself.
I am. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Mr. Chairman? Okay, so thank you very much. I will be brief. I did submit a letter, which I'd like to quickly summarize. And for the record, my name is Scott Horsley. I have been retained by Hill Law to review this project, as Dan just mentioned. Briefly, in terms of qualifications, I have over 30 years of experience in the field of water resources management as a hydrologist. I teach graduate level courses at both Harvard and Tufts on water resources management. Most of my career, I've served as a consultant to EPA nationally at headquarters contract, worked all across the country and overseas. I'll leave it at that. I'm happy to supply my CV, which has quite a bit more experience here in Massachusetts. Served on a number of advisory committees with Mass DEP, including currently. My comments on the project generally, and I'll try not to repeat here, Mr. Chairman, is we obviously have a concentrated discharge of wastewater on the site. We have stormwater infiltration on the site. The site is also pretty well surrounded by jurisdictional wetlands. We haven't heard a lot of discussion on that yet. And it's also neighboring a number of single-family homes and the Ipswich River Wildlife Sanctuary in terms of ecological resources. So that's kind of the setting, which makes it a pretty constrained site. And I think I would underscore and repeat what Attorney Hill just said, that this is a site that probably needs more data, not less, to prove out these impacts. So I think the modeling work that you mentioned, the water quality analysis, is something that would be really important. Test pit data has already been talked about. I just want to specify that Mass DEP requirements are a minimum of 2 test pits for each stormwater infiltration system. Only one is shown in one of the 2. Now, I know they're going back out, but again, a minimum of 2 per infiltration system. And then secondly, I know they're going to be doing test pits on the wastewater system. That's going to be critical. And as Dan already mentioned, we need to establish something called estimated seasonal high groundwater. It looks like the so-called perfunctory USGS method might be the best one to use, because not only are we in a drought, but we're also at the low time of the year. So it's kind of the perfect storm in terms of dryness, if you will. So the water levels that are found later this week are not going to be in any way an indication of what the high water table is. So you're gonna have to use some mechanism to adjust those to look at long-term seasonal high, because the site, based upon the preliminary test pits, it does look like there is shallow water table through a good part of the site, and I've documented that in my letter. I won't go through that right now. On the groundwater mounding analysis, let me first explain what groundwater mounding is. This is what happens with the groundwater and the water table once you start infiltrating additional water into the subsurface. The water levels come up. They get more shallow. And the engineer earlier mentioned that, I think two of the engineers mentioned that they're putting plenty of water in the ground on the infiltration system, more than they need to. And that's great, except for the fact that that too will raise the water table. So the most important point here would be that the groundwater mounting analysis, in my opinion, should include the impacts of both the wastewater system and the two proposed stormwater systems, and they should be analyzed together, not separately, because in fact, that's what will happen. There will be cumulative impacts. There will be interference and overlap. So the mounting analysis really should look at all of those systems together and based upon the seasonal high water table conditions that I already mentioned previously. The last thing I guess I want to talk a little bit more about is the impacts of the drinking water supply. We've already heard some of that. Again, I won't repeat. Obviously the plan is to use the credit land to compensate for the very high density that's being proposed on this site. The applicant's engineer mentioned that the credit land is down gradient. I've seen no evidence of any water table map. If there is one, I would specifically love to see that. I don't know that it exists, therefore I'm not sure how he knows it's down gradient, because in my opinion, that would be the only way to know, and that is a requirement. And that's also important if we're talking about impacts on other receptors. There are wetland resource areas nearby. There's a small stream across the street in the immediate neighborhood. It's going to be important to know which way the groundwater is moving, which way the wastewater is going to be moving. We need what's called a water table map. I'll certainly show you one at the next meeting if we don't have one produced here to explain in more detail how important that is and how that's used. And that will be used to determine if in fact the credit line, the land is down gradient. I also want to reiterate what the engineer from GM2 said. There is a requirement to show that the concentration of nitrogen is no more than 10 milligrams per liter at the down gradient property line. He inferred that as a optional requirement. In my assessment of this project, I think it would be an oversight not to include that analysis because, again, the proximity of the site to not only the Zone 2, but the wetlands, the conservation land, et cetera. So I think that requirement is pretty standard. And frankly, looking at what I've seen so far, I'm not sure they can meet it. And it would be not a good reason to not do it because they can't meet it. So I would strongly urge that the board require that 10 milligram per liter at the downgraded property limit be conducted and provided, because I think there could be some real constraints there. And let me just quickly look what else I have here, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I also want to reiterate on the credit land, they have to add additional acreage to meet this so-called 440 gallons or 550 gallons per day per acre. That cannot include wetlands. Attorney Hill said that. I just want to reiterate that. That's really important because, again, I couldn't read the map, as Attorney Hill mentioned, to see where the land is, but there are a lot of wetlands here, and the wetlands don't count as part of that acreage. And I can certainly provide plenty of explanation, detail, and reference as to why that is the case if we want to debate that at a future meeting. And I think I will stop there. I think that covers most of the points. I did submit a letter. I'll look forward to reviewing the test pits and specifically how the applicant plans to adjust the water levels they might find to estimated seasonal high. That'll become really important in a lot of this analysis. So I'll stop there, Mr. Chairman. Be happy to answer any questions if you have them. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay. A response from, Will.
Just very briefly, I'm not going to respond too much. I did have an answer for because again, I was the engineer on the project next door. There was no mass balance done on that project. What they did, they put in a treatment system which allowed them to go to 550 gallons per day per for the whole project per bedroom. And so they put that, it's a BioClear system, and the BioClear system was installed, and there was no mass balance done for that project. I'm not suggesting that we don't need to do one. And in fact, we have the same concerns for the well that have been expressed tonight. We don't want to contaminate a public drinking water well, but just for what it's worth. But I don't agree with everything that was said by them regarding the study, but I think we're not going to debate it tonight, so.
Okay. Thank you. Any questions at this, any questions at this point from my colleagues regarding anything they've heard? Okay, Mr. Timon.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just very briefly, both Attorney Hill and Mr. Horsley outlined a range of state standards that they're concerned, need to be demonstrated as being met, Title V and DEP standards. And as Mr. Ware said, we're going to be applying to the Board of Health, which, as this board knows, is the appropriate body to administer that state statute. And so, as far as modeling and data and the various things that the Board of Health would want to see to decide whether we were meeting Title V and state standards, those will be provided to the board. I don't see anything in the groundwater protection overlay district standards that is more restrictive than the relevant state standards that we're talking about. And so I would submit that the board certainly could, and we frankly expect may well, condition a comprehensive permit if the board is inclined to grant one upon Board of Health approval of Title V. And that would certainly cover, I think, just about all of the issues that have been raised this evening.
Thank you. Is there anyone else, either in person or on Zoom, that would like to be heard at this point about septic and water issues? No? Okay. Again, any questions, specific questions from the board? So I've heard that it sounds like there's the engineers of, I'll say both sides, the engineers have, exchanged information. There, as you said, the peer reviewer has suggested that some things, that additional information that they want, it sounds like most of which the applicant's engineers will provide. There have been issues raised by Attorney Hill for his clients. I think, some of those, I'm sure, are valid points to be considered. My own view is we'll make our own decision, but I think this board, we're not septic experts. We're going to somewhat follow the Board of Health, but we do have to make our own decision on the groundwater protection issue. So we'll certainly be revisiting the issue of water and sewer. And over the next month, I'll be in touch through the planning coordinator to help try to facilitate the exchange of information. So if there's nothing else, I think we can continue to October, at which point, what are we going to consider next month?
We had scheduled architectural presentations for the October meeting.
Okay, so our next meeting is October 5th. Is there a motion to continue this hearing to October 5th?
Motion.
Okay, moved by Bruce Gingrich. Is there a second?
I second.
Second by David Parent-Chief. Any further discussion? If not, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Okay, thank you all very much for your attendance. We'll take a 5-minute break before we hit the next one. Okay, welcome back. Next item. Application for property owned by Gordon Conwell Theological Seminary at 130 Essex Street. Applicant Harbor Light Community Partners. Applicant is seeking a variance from lot area requirements and a finding of fact for change of use from student housing to multifamily dwelling in order to construct 3 additions to the existing multifamily dwellings. Okay, again, preliminary business, just to repeat, member David Parent-Chief was unable to attend our August meeting. Since then, he did watch a videotape of the August meeting, correct? Including the public hearing on 130 Essex Street. And that was the first meeting you missed on this particular hearing?
Yes.
Correct? You so attest, and you'll file the requisite paperwork to invoke the Mullen rule, correct?
Correct.
Okay, very good. Thank you. Okay, I think when we last met, we finished up, we had quite a bit of input from the applicant and the butters, and I think we said we certainly will hear from the abutter, but I think the members would perhaps come in with particular items that they would like to have fleshed out in the application. So why don't we start with that? Are there any particular matters that you'd like to see more detail from the applicant on? No? Okay. Well. Okay. We'll hear from the applicant. Oh, we said if it seemed appropriate, we may, at the conclusion of this meeting, we said we might give a straw vote as how the board was leaning, since one of the issues seemed to be the applicant didn't want to put further financial and psychic capital into the project if it was not going to go anywhere. But obviously the board wants to have a completed project to vote on. So we'll hear from the applicant.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Andrew DeFranza from Harbor Light. I'm pondering whether I have enough.
Oh, excuse me, just before, I beg your pardon, just as part of the record, we did receive a letter, I guess, a petition, if you will, from self-styled Brown Hill neighbors in opposition to the granting of the variance. That's been submitted and is part of the record for anyone to review should they choose to. Okay.
I was going to use your psychic capital line as a joke punchline, but you messed with my timing, so I'm not gonna do that now. I'll use it later. So we have no new information at this point because there was not a process after the last meeting. We were waiting to hear what you might request, similar to a 40B process where you might ask for different sorts of information at different intervals. But I think, as you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, the primary interest we had was in the straw poll question as to whether or not we should proceed, and then if we should proceed, on what basis and format. We could, Attorney Samasco is on the Zoom call if you wanted to discuss the questions of the validity or the relevance of a variance, which has been on the table as a question. We could do that, but mostly we were deferring to you and to the board for how you would like us to proceed and if you would like us to proceed. So that we knew what the parameters were and what the next steps were, but there's no further information at this time.
Okay. Well, the the parameters of the project have somewhat changed from the initial application to what we heard at the last meeting regarding affordability and who the project would be for. So I think we would like that to have, and phasing has been mentioned. I think we'd like a, doesn't have to be, well, a memorandum, essentially, where's the project now? What are you proposing? Who would live there? How it would, phasing, any, infrastructure, things like that.
Yeah.
I think at this point, and this is the board will, when we have what is presumably if you would call it a final project or what you're proposing, we'd want to get input from, this is on us, from other town boards. At this point, other town boards really haven't, weighed in on things in any detail. And I guess we'd want confirmation that the units would qualify for SHI, that they would help us with where we would stand with our affordable housing issues. So those would be things at the top of the list.
We can do that.
Anything my members would like to add to this?
Could we please add a in-depth analysis, an in-depth explanation of the hardship that you believe is the case with this variance?
Yes.
Sure. Do you want to address that, or does Ms. Samasco want to address it?
Yeah, Attorney Samasco could, I think, still on. We could do that now, and then we could also add that to the memo if that's what you'd like. Miranda, you're okay to comment on that now?
Sure. I think most of this has been outlined in our petition and in prior meetings. But the hardship here under Chapter 40A can flow from different qualities or characteristics of the property, as I'm sure you're all aware, including things like the shape of the property, soil, topography. Structures are also a qualifying consideration in variance applications under Chapter 40A. And here we have a situation where the property is improved with these existing 6 buildings containing existing 210 apartments that really are not capable of being used in any fashion in compliance with the zoning ordinance in the absence of some relief. And so the hardship stems from the buildings. The grounds for the variance are that without relief here, the applicant really has no ability to make any feasible use of these buildings within the parameters of your zoning ordinance and the current zoning. And furthermore, I think it is important for the board and for members of the public to recognize that the variance we're seeking is not a new variance. It is a variance that already exists on the property. The property, as currently configured, does not conform with the single-family residential lot area requirements. The configuration would intensify that variance or that nonconformity, but there is absolutely no configuration that would not intensify that conformity. Any severing of these buildings into separate lots for separate ownership is going to require a variance. And I think under those circumstances where we are requesting relief for a condition to intensify an existing nonconformity, where there is no feasible way to bring the property into compliance without a variance. And furthermore, I think it's within the board's discretion to consider the fact that these buildings already exist. We're not coming to you and asking for a variance to create something new. We're asking you for a variance to permit a feasible and economic use of buildings that otherwise cannot comply with zoning.
Okay. I know it's in your packet, you did, but I don't have it in front of me, but in order, how much additional square footage or land would the project need to not require the dimensional variance?
I don't know that I know the answer to that. Miranda, I don't know if you do.
I can get to it. Again, bear with me just a moment. I do have that information.
Bill, is Attorney Pucci still in the room, or does the town have any town council on the call?
I'm sorry?
Attorney Pucci.
Is there any town council on the call?
No, he was only a special counsel on Asbury Commons, so.
So I do have the answer to that question. Based on the 210 apartments, the area requirement under existing zoning that there be 40,000 square feet of area for each dwelling unit, you would need approximately 193 acres to come into compliance. Now, the existing site is 102 acres.
Okay, thank you. Okay. I guess we should, we should address the issue, as I'm sure everyone knows, that one of the considerations, not directly of this board, but of the community, is the whole issue of what may happen with the rest of the site. As I say, that doesn't directly, affect what this board is charged with doing, but there is a warrant article on the fall town meeting to appropriate funds for an overall study of best use and whatnot of the entire property. Do you have anything to say about that, Mr. DeFranza? Or?
I do have a few things to say about that.
Okay, great.
But,
okay, we don't like dead air.
No, I'm good for that if that's what you're trying to avoid. I understand it's been a serious part of the discussion about the long-term planning, and as sort of a local person, I can understand that interest. As a matter for us, we don't have any control over what's going to happen with the rest of the site, but I do understand that the community is concerned about it. I think we would ask the board and want to, I think, be clear about our intentions, that we certainly would not voluntarily participate as a lever in a discussion back and forth between the town and the seminary. If that was the goal, to try to use our process to leverage their participation, I can understand why we might want it, or why you all might want it, but that would have to be a direct conversation between the two of you. We would back up at that point and allow that to happen. We're not going to voluntarily hang around in the middle and get squished, as it were. So that it would be good for us to know that, if that was part of the goal or the intention. Also important to note, we have site control on our existing deposit through the third week of September, and that's not money I'm going to leave on the table. So if it looks like the path is not solid, we'll retract the deposit which would be similar to the backing up, or we'll have to ask for an extension on the terms. So I have to negotiate with them one way or the other. But I would always be very straight ahead, as I have been, that, you know, that's not a position we want to be in. So if that's something that's desired, we would ask that the board would tell us that. Maybe that's per the straw poll.
Not a decision for this board. We're not
Understood.
involved in that. Any questions or comments from members of the public?
Actually do what he does for a living. I'm a developer.
Did identify yourself?
Martin Zeef, 37 Miles River Road. Martin Zeef, 37
Okay.
I'm for affordable housing. Hands down. I've done it. I built it and all that. What I'm chafing against a bit is the process that the college and the developer have gone through. Not a holistic issue. As you said, there's not been a master plan done. No one's looked at the septic. No one's presented traffic. No one said what's going to happen to the rest of the land. So my issue here is not what might end up being in those buildings, but the fact that the Gordon has run a terrible, and the public, you've gotten letters from the community where they're up in arms, right? So the way I usually do this is come up with a plan, go to the public, try to build consensus as you do. But there's two real issues here underlying that your job, at least from my perspective. I'm not professional ZBA. One is, as you mentioned, Mr. Chairman, most appropriately, this is spot zoning. You're taking something, to get 210 apartments on this site requires 198 acres, right? They got 106. So what's really happening here? They're carving out these two lots that are non-conforming, creating their own hardship in the process. We need relief because we want to do these buildings here that exist, so you should give us approval to do this. What they're not telling you is the next hand, they get the rest of the acreage where they can go put houses on. So this is actually an economic boon to Gordon, not a hardship. This is a hardship of their own making. So as we sit here and try to parse through this, a lot is getting lost in the weeds. As you said, Mr. Chairman, take a step back. What does this land afford in terms of development? Single-family houses? You can do apartments, but the law and the bylaws are quite clear as to what a hardship is. I think it was section 10.334, whatever it is. That's 10.334. It is a hardship created by the land or circumstances surrounding it that you give relief for setbacks or other small things. It's not meant for spot zoning. And you know, and I know, and they know that as the variance is granted, it's going to be appealed. So everyone's sitting here spinning their wheels trying to get something approved that's going to get appealed by a bunch of people who are up in arms because Gordon College didn't do a master plan and sit down with them. So what I'm suggesting is someone get control of this mess and sit down and map out what can be done, which may include apartments. But clearly the variance is not meant to create an economic boon to the college by creating value in those small parcels and then going to develop the rest of it. I thank you for your time, Mr.
Thank you.
Mr. Board.
Rick Mitchell, 36 Rock Maple Ave. Just to update you, you probably have heard enough of me in prior meetings, but my basic concern is that the massing of a project like this without the consideration of the entire piece of property really is would amount to a true folly in terms of the land use here. The project as proposed lacks so much detail that I don't even know how any board, never mind the ZBA, could make a intelligent decision about what's going here, when it's going here, and how it's going to occur. There just is no information. I remember the change of use when Institution of Savings was going on where Hamilton Gardens is. And the applicant came in with a complete plan, architectural drawings. There was no question about what was going there, what size it was, when it was going to go in, and what it was going to look like, and who was going to occupy it. I want to update you to answer the question about the general plan. I met today with Sean Farrell, Chair of the Planning Board, Joe Demolowitz, Town Manager, Scott Sundquist, President of the seminary, and Ken Barnes, their project manager for their move, and their attorney whose name I can't remember right now. We came to a conclusion and a agreement that the seminary and the town will jointly engage a consultant to do a strategic plan of about 3 to 4 months to identify what are the highest and best uses for that piece of property, looking at market forces, looking at location, geography, infrastructure, existing buildings, conditions, and the seminary has agreed to contribute financially to making that happen. They agree that it's important for the town and for themselves to be engaged in a very constructive, transparent, very public process to look at what are the best uses of that property. By carving off this 210 units and just saying, well, it's really just not, we'll just carve it off and then let the rest go, just completely complicates what the potential uses of that property could be. And talking to the seminary, they still are trying to determine what their uses of that property are going to be. According to the president, they're looking at retaining some residential component there because housing in Boston is too expensive. They want to, at least we understand, they are retaining an option for 2 of those buildings, but we don't know if they want more or less. They don't know yet. They don't know what buildings they're going to keep because they're still in motion. This whole campus is in motion. This is a once in a lifetime, once in a generational opportunity for the town to engage with the seminary who have told us they really want to do this right, and I trust that they do. And I think that it's important for the ZBA in thinking about this project is, can you contribute to making this historic transformation of this piece of property that's done intelligently, thoughtfully, and carefully, as opposed to carving off this piece and hoping that it gets developed, but we're not quite sure when, how, and in what configuration. Again, I believe there's not enough information. I believe maybe some component of it will be affordable housing. It may be once the seminary decides what it's actually doing with that piece of property and what part of those residences they want to retain, great. And maybe Harbor Lights come back and they have clarity about what's going on with that piece of property. We have clarity about what's happening with that property, and Gordon Theological Seminary has clarity about that piece of property. Until that happens, I don't think it really makes sense for this project to be granted a change of use because we don't know what's happening with that entire piece of property. Thank you.
So just when you say property, I guess, did the discussion include the entire property, including these parcels? I mean, that's important for us, certainly.
Understood. They did not exclude any of the pieces of property in this discussion. They did not say, well, we've got this agreement to sell these 6 pieces of property or 4 pieces of property or whatever number of pieces of property. They agreed to participate in a strategic plan looking at the entire piece of property. Now, I don't know if they did that intentionally, they didn't exclude this, or they just didn't think about it, but it wasn't specifically mentioned that this was off the table for part of the strategic study. So.
Okay. Thank you.
And as you said, tonight, the Board of Selectmen are putting on the warrant for town meeting an appropriation for the town's share of this strategic study. The Board of Selectmen have signed off on that. We're going to the voters to ask for the funding to do that. So we have a process going forward for a strategic plan for that entire piece of property. I just think this is a little premature. I think maybe affordable housing might be relevant there. We just don't know, and I think it's incumbent upon all of us to be working together to come up with the best possible project that incorporates everybody's concerns, the towns, the abutters, and planning board, and the ZBA, and the Conservation Commission, and health board, with something that we can all agree on that makes sense. Thank you.
Thank you. Patrick, was Robin Stein going to be on
She's not here tonight.
the? Okay, I guess, okay. Any other comments from anyone else? Sean Farrell had indicated that he would try to come to the meeting tonight. The selectmen are also meeting tonight, but I guess they don't run as crisp a meeting as I.
I have a comment, Rudy Kazan from Essex Street.
Okay, if you'd identify yourself, please.
Rudolph Pisano, Essex Street. Thank you for recognizing me, Mr. Chairman. I wanted to talk about the change of use. But under the gun decision, you need a cessation of the previous use, and you also need a purchase and sale being executed. You don't have either. You have a continuation of the use, as Mr. Mitchell outlined, and you don't have a change in ownership probably for a couple of years. So you're on very weak ground considering that. Secondly, in terms of the hardship, an affordable housing developer has the ability to apply for a waiver from the zoning act. And so they have absolutely no basis to claim hardship because the state has specifically given them a way around any hardship that they might face. So there's absolutely no legal grounds to claim a hardship in this case. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Okay.
Mr. Chairman, Myron Walters, the unnamed attorney here for the seminary. May I speak?
Sure.
Thank you. Yeah, just a couple of things maybe to clarify some of the things that have just been said about the meeting that we had. The seminary hasn't changed its position. Harbor Light has had, we've been in communication and discussions with Harbor Light for many, many months now, dating back prior to when the town approached the seminary early this year about zoning the whole parcel. So we're still on board for this. As I've said before in the meetings that we've had, the seminaries being able to sell some of these apartment buildings is going to be very helpful to the seminary in terms of allowing it the kind of flexibility to work with the town. We are committed to the town. We've said that all along, and that was a good meeting today, that we're committed to working with the town. But with respect to the rest of the property, there are six apartments there. They're going to be apartment buildings, whatever happens in the future. That's not going to change. So we see a very clear rationale to move ahead with this particular portion of it. The septic uses are going to change. It's been like that for decades. So those issues really don't come into it. So we're happy to continue with it. We think it's appropriate to decide this on its merits alone. And then there's plenty of land and a lot of work to be done with the abutters and with the whole town to create a zoning construct for the rest of that parcel. So I do think maybe there's been a little misunderstanding in terms of the timing. Again, we were working with Harbor Light for about 1.5 years before any of this came up and before even the seminary had entertained any notions about relocating any of its operations. And then it was the town that came to us back in February and March to talk about long-range planning to maybe rezone the entire parcel. We welcomed that. And then that's when we started looking at some relocation. So that timing is helpful because people keep saying, well, we don't have a plan. Well, that's not our role to have a plan. I think it's going to be the ability of the whole town working together, a process that we're now starting to talk about the parcel. And that will include, obviously, a lot of conversations with the butters, but then a lot of conversations with other stakeholders in the town to see how we can best use this property. But again, those things can be handled separately. The apartments are there. They're going to be apartments in the future. So this is just a change of ownership, not in a way, not a change of use. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. Is this something new?
No, just a comment in response to that. I have a question.
Okay.
Is that all right? I'm Valerie Peck, 37 Miles River Road. Just in response to the attorney's comment, yes, they are existing apartments, and the density was predicated on 102 acres, of which it still falls short of what the dimensional table suggests. So I don't see how, because they're already there and we can subdivide them and develop them, how that makes it okay to disregard the density that they're potentially creating, not only for that site, that intensification, but also the potential density that they're going to have for the remaining acreage after those are subdivided. So I'm just confused why it just seems a fait accompli that because apartments are there, it's okay to subdivide them from the 102 acres.
Well, that's why we're here. I mean, that's our.
But I'm just clarifying your job description.
Okay. Hey, thanks. Okay. My colleagues have any questions? And I guess,
I do. I think,
yeah, okay.
from what I heard, Harbor Light, obviously don't want to lose your deposit. Let's figure something out, straw up, down today. Gordon Conwell talking about, hey, let's all work together. Rick, hey, planning board, let's find the best plan. It seems like from what I've been hearing, everyone wants the best outcome for this property that makes sense for the town. Does it not make sense to just, if the attorney is saying that they all want to work together, to just pull the application from the zoning board now and let the planning board and the town figure it out with the seminary? Am I hearing that right?
Well, I guess I hear what you're saying, but I guess it's not up to the zoning board to.
Right.
We have to deal with the project that's in front of us. And geez, you said that 4-letter word, planning board. No, just kidding. I know, I get it. That was, in little too much inside baseball. So
I'm kind of on the same position though, is that we have, obviously the town's about to appropriate money and the college is about to appropriate money for a bigger plan, an actual plan. Not this, again, people have said piecemeal, people have said that, but we can't make a decision on what ifs. We don't have enough information.
Okay. Anybody else
Well, our scope is just the variance. If we are looking black and white for zoning board, we are looking at, does this meet the variance requirement? We're not looking at, has the college paid the town in the past? Has the what is the overall scheme of what the greater property is? We are only looking as zoning board at what the application is at. So.
Okay, well, there's two issues here. I mean, it's, with the change of use and the variance. And I think, normally I get input from my colleagues first and on my position, but I'm getting the sense that I'll dive off the diving board So, anyway, my current view is that with respect to the change of use, I could see allowing the change of use. Because to me, the change of use is a change of use on paper. The facts on the ground are these are 210 residential units, and when all the dust settled, if Harbor Light took them over, they would be 210 residential units. They currently have families in them. They would currently have families in them. So, in my view, very little would change on the ground. So, in terms of approving a change of use, I could see doing it. I find the variance much more problematic. I mean, the standard is high. Attorney Samasco, made a good faith effort at why there is a hardship, and it's certainly a very unusual situation. But the reason I asked the question about how much land would it take to support the, without the variance was, well, there are land use techniques that perhaps could, support this without, a variance, but that doesn't appear to be there. So the variance, I'm very much on the, at this point, very much on the cusp in terms of whether or not I would support it. So if anyone else wants to weigh in.
I'll agree on your variance feeling.
Yeah, me too. I'm the same way. I mean, it's too high density and too big. This town doesn't have anything like this. Right? The town has to be able to work together to figure out how it's going to affect our school system. Because I don't think it's had a full occupancy in the last.
Excuse me just one second.
Microphone.
Oh.
Oh, there we go. This is a huge density project, and the schools, we don't know how that's going to affect the schools. I don't know what the occupancy level has been in the campus in the last 10 years. It's just a lot of town planning stuff that needs to be evaluated too, and I think that's where we're trying to get to. So, I just, obviously the septic system's got to be dealt with too. We can't just say, yeah, go ahead and do this without knowing how that's going to be dealt with.
Either of our two alternates have anything to add? I'll take that as a no. Okay. Anything you'd like to say in response, or just,
No, I think mainly we just appreciate the clarity from the board, and that will help us frame what we do next.
Okay. I think we will continue this to next month to see what happens.
Mr. Chair?
Yes?
Excuse me, I just, in listening to the comments, I have a question to pose to members, because what I heard was that, at least from you, Mr. Chair, was that the use. Excuse me?
Wait a minute, somebody else was, go ahead, I'm sorry.
Okay. What I was hearing is that the use itself is less problematic than the variance. But as I stated before, there is absolutely no scenario for separating these existing apartments from the rest of the campus without a variance. And so I'm curious what the board's thought is on that. Is there because if you follow through the logic here, then it would, what I'm hearing is that under no circumstances can you foresee allowing the apartment use to be separate from the rest of the campus, regardless of what happens to the seminary.
Well, I mean, that's one view, and I certainly take the point. And again, just speaking for myself, if you're right, obviously the property required a variance in a sense in the first place because, under the dimensional requirements. If this were, if Harbor Light were in some circumstances purchasing the whole property, whole 102 acres, I might have a different view because the variance would not be intensified. I mean, the variance is, there's a hardship issue, but there's the who created the variant, or the who created the hardship issue. It's not an easy point, and I will certainly, in the next month, reread the materials that have been submitted, but at this point, my gut view for purposes of a straw vote is no. So that's all I can say.
Could I say something?
Ma'am?
Nancy Dashkind?
No, I think we've, ma'am, I think, we've kind of closed off.
Yeah, typically, but this is not adequate. But fine, as long as there's going to be no decision.
We're not making a decision tonight. Well, briefly, ma'am, what do you have to say?
I would just like to add, having listened to all this from the beginning of the meeting until now, recognizing that the planning board is willing to work with the seminary, is willing to work with the selectmen and put something on the town warrant to do a reasonable assessment before any decision is made, is at least a step in the right direction. And having lived across the street from this institution with both its benefits and liabilities for more than many years of anyone else here, I can attest to the fact that the buildings that we're talking about that exist, they are not to code. They are not.
Ma'am, this is going beyond. This is going, ma'am. This is going beyond the scope of.
I understand that.
Well, then I'm sorry.
And that the septic systems stink. All of these things are going to be big issues, and to have a plan for the entire site, not just the specified, knockoff.
Ma'am, that is not the job. That is not the job of the zoning board.
Well, then give it to somebody else.
And take it away from this.
Thank you.
Meaningless decision.
Okay. We'll continue this hearing till October 5th. Is there a motion to continue the hearing to October 5th?
I motion to continue the hearing until October 5th.
Okay, moved by David Perrenchief. Is there a second?
I'll second it.
Seconded by Bruce Gingrich. Any further discussion? If not, all those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Oh, I guess we have the minutes to, we have the August minutes to approve. So this will be, I think Bruce Gingrich and Andy, since they were present at the meeting. Correct. So, is there a motion to approve the August minutes?
I accept the motion to approve the August minutes.
Moved by Andy Phillip. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
Second by Bruce Gingrich. Any further discussion? All those in favor, please say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Okay, is there a motion to adjourn?
I motion to adjourn.
Moved by David Perrenchief to adjourn. Is there a second?
I'll second that.
All those in favor, please say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you and good night.
At least.